My name is Nora, I'm 27, and I'm sitting in a leather chair in an estate attorney's office on a Tuesday morning. And my mother is across the table from me, and she has not looked at me once since I walked in. She is wearing the same perfume she wore when I was a child. Something floral. Something that used to mean home. The attorney opens the folder. My mother reaches for her water glass. I keep my hands flat on the table. Because what my mother does not know, what she has not known for the past 14 months, is that I have already read everything in that folder, every page, every line, every transfer date. She had no idea I was coming, not like this. Before I take you back to where this started, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love knowing where you're listening from. Now let me take you back to 10 years before this moment. 10 years before that Tuesday morning, I was 17 years old and standing on the sidewalk in front of the house I had grown up in, holding a garbage bag that contained everything my mother had decided I was allowed to keep. It was October. Specifically, it was October 14th. I know because it was 11 days before my 18th birthday. A fact that mattered legally, though I would not understand how much it mattered until much later. The air smelled like wet leaves in someone's fireplace 2 blocks over. The garbage bag had a small tear along the bottom seam. I could feel it giving way against my left leg. My father stood in the doorway. He did not come down the steps. My mother did not come to the door at all. There was no dramatic fight. That's what I want you to understand. There was no screaming, no thrown objects, no ultimatum delivered in the heat of argument. What there was a Tuesday evening in October when my mother sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten breakfast every morning for 17 years, and told me in the calm voice she used for grocery lists and dentist appointment reminders that I needed to find somewhere else to live. She said she and my father had talked about it. She said I was going in a direction they couldn't support. She said it quietly, like she was reading from a script she'd rehearsed. I had stopped going to the church they attended. That was the direction. I had told my mother 3 weeks before that I didn't believe the way she needed me to believe. I was 17. I was telling the truth as I understood it. I did not know it would cost me a house. My mother's name is Vivian. She is a small woman with precise posture and very clean fingernails and a particular quality of certainty that belongs to people who have never seriously questioned whether they might be wrong. She baked. She organized the church bake sale every November. She sent birthday cards on time. She was the kind of mother who is easy to describe to other people as a good mother. She was, when I was small, someone I loved completely. She braided my hair every Sunday morning before church, French braids, tight and neat, that stayed in all day. She smelled like the floral perfume and hand lotion. She read to me at night until I was old enough to read myself, and then she kept reading to me anyway because I asked. I am telling you this because none of what she did later makes sense without knowing what she was before, or who she was to me before. The woman who braided my hair on Sunday mornings is the same woman who handed me a garbage bag on a Tuesday night and called it parenting. That is the part one have had to learn to hold without needing to resolve it. My father's name is Warren. He is a quiet man, the kind of quiet that looks like peace but is actually just the absence of any opinion strong enough to act on. He worked at a grain elevator for 31 years. He drove the same truck for 14 of them. He never raised his voice. He never raised a hand. He also never, not once in my memory, contradicted my mother in any way that mattered. When she handed me the garbage bag, he stood in the doorway and watched, and his face was the face of a man who had made a decision to have no opinion. He said, "Be safe, Nora." That was all. I walked to the end of the block. I didn't know where I was going. I sat down on someone's retaining wall and held the garbage bag between my knees and looked at the street. It was 7:22 p.m. I know because I checked my phone. I remember thinking that it was too late to call my school counselor. I remember thinking that I had $38 in my bank account. I remember the smell of the fireplace from 2 blocks over and the feeling of the concrete wall through my jeans. Then I called the one person I thought might answer. Her name was Joan. She was the housing caseworker assigned to a friend of mine, a girl from school named Becca who has spent time in foster care. Joan had come to our school twice to do workshops on tenant rights and housing resources for minors. She was in her late 40s at the time, with short gray streaked hair and the kind of direct eye contact that tells you immediately that this person does not waste words. I had her number because Becca had given it to me 6 months before and said, "If you ever need it, use it." I had thought at the time that I would never need it. I was wrong. Joan picked up on the 3rd ring. I told her what had happened. She asked me 3 questions: my age, my location, whether I was safe. Then she said, "Stay where you are. I'll be there in 22 minutes." She was there in 19. Joan found me emergency housing that night, a church shelter that had 4 beds reserved for youth in crisis, none of which required parental consent for minors over 16. I slept in a room that smelled of industrial cleaner and old carpet and something like cedar, and I stared at the ceiling for most of the night, and I was not okay, but I was indoors. I want to say that plainly. I was indoors and I was safe. Because of Joan. Over the following weeks, Joan helped me navigate what came next. She knew people, social workers, a school district liaison, a woman at the county housing office. She helped me stay enrolled in school because in our county, a minor experiencing homelessness had the legal right to continue in their district school regardless of housing status. I did not know that. She did. Joan drove me to school twice in those first 2 weeks. She sat in the parking lot and waited while I got my things from my locker. She never made it a big thing. She just showed up. My parents did not call, not once. Not in the first week, not in the first month. I checked my phone constantly those first 10 days, the way you check something you know won't change, but can't stop looking at. 73 times in the first 4 days, I opened my recent calls list. There was nothing from them. I stopped checking after day 11. When I turned 18, 11 days after they put me out, I applied for legal emancipation as a formality. Joan recommended it, to establish my independent legal status clearly for housing and financial aid purposes. I was already functionally on my own. The paperwork just made it official. I graduated high school that following June. I was in the top quarter of my class. My parents did not come to graduation. My Aunt Gail came, my mother's older sister, who had heard what happened and driven 40 minutes to sit in the bleachers in the June heat and watch me walk across the stage. She said nothing about my parents. She took me to dinner afterward at a diner down the road and she ordered the biggest piece of pie on the menu and put it in front of me and said, "You did this yourself." That was all she said about any of it. I did not see or speak to my parents for 4 years. Then my grandmother died. My maternal grandmother, Vivian's mother, had owned a small property 30 miles outside of town, a farmhouse on 6 acres, modest but real. She'd bought it with my grandfather in 1971 and kept it after he died. She had spoken to me, in a scattered way of grandmothers, about the property going to the family one day. I had not thought much about it. I was 17 when she said it. I had other things to think about. My grandmother died in February of the year I turned 22. I read her obituary online. Joan called me when she heard. She had kept in loose touch with me through the college years, the way certain people do when they want to make sure you landed somewhere solid. I did not go to the funeral. I was not sure I was welcome. I sent flowers. My mother did not acknowledge them. 3 months after the funeral, I received a letter. Not from my parents. From an attorney, a probate firm in the county seat, a man named Gerald Hartwell. The letter informed me that as a named heir in my grandmother's estate, I was entitled to a copy of the will upon request. I requested it, I read it, and I sat down on the floor of my apartment. I had a small apartment by then, 2nd floor, window facing an alley, and I read it again. My grandmother had left the farmhouse and the 6 acres equally among her 3 children, my mother Vivian, my Aunt Gail, and my Uncle Dennis, who lived in another state. But she had also included a separate clause, a personal property bequest, specifically, the contents of the farmhouse, including certain items she had set aside and labeled for me by name, and a savings account in the amount of $23,400 that she had established for me specifically and listed me as the named beneficiary. $23,400 in a savings account. In my name. I called the probate attorney. He confirmed the account existed. He also told me that the account had been distributed. Not to me, to my mother. On what basis? I asked. He said there had been a notarized letter submitted to the estate, signed with what appeared to be my signature, relinquishing my claim to the bequest and authorizing distribution to my mother as guardian. I was 22 years old. I had not lived with my parents since I was 17. I had not signed any letter. I had not been contacted about the estate at any point prior to this conversation. I said, "I didn't sign anything." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. He said, "I see." I wrote it down. Not in a yellow notebook. I kept mine in a digital document, a habit from college. I titled the file Grandmother Estate, Do Not Delete. I wrote the date. I wrote the dollar amount. I wrote the attorney's name. I wrote, "Signature on relinquishment letter, not mine." Joan, when I told her, said 4 words. "That is document fraud." She didn't say, "Are you sure?" She didn't say, maybe there's a misunderstanding. She said 4 words, and then she said, I know someone you should call. I was not ready to make that call yet. I needed to understand more first. So I kept going. Month 6 after the funeral, I filed a formal request with the probate court for the full estate record. I was entitled to it as a named heir. The record took 11 weeks to arrive. When it did, I spread it out on my kitchen table on a Saturday morning with a highlighter and a legal pad, and I went through it the way Joan had taught me to go through documents. Methodically, chronologically, looking for the chain. The relinquishment letter was in the record. My name was on it. The notarization stamp was from a notary in my parents' town, dated 17 days after the funeral, 17 days after I had been in my apartment in another city, never called, never contacted, knowing nothing about any letter. The signature looked something like mine. The way a signature looks when someone has studied it carefully but doesn't know the particular way I make the loop on the end. It was close. It was not mine. I photographed every page. I sent them to the secure cloud folder I had created, titled Simply Evidence. I sat back in my chair. I was 22 years old, working as an administrative coordinator at a nonprofit, making $36,400 a year, eating lunch at my desk, and I had just confirmed that my mother had committed fraud against a dead woman's estate to take money that had been left to me. I did the number, $23,400 taken. Plus whatever the personal property bequest had included, the labeled items, which I had never received, which I had no way to value without the inventory. Plus the years between 17 and now, which had cost me things I couldn't put a dollar amount on. Not yet. I sat very still. Outside my window, someone in the alley was moving boxes. A truck was idling. The fluorescent light in my kitchen hummed, and I made a decision. Not today, not yet, but someday. And I would not come back to that town without being ready. I wrote one line in the document, ready when I am. Not before. Then I closed the laptop. And I called Joan. Quick pause here. If you've ever been the person who kept everything running while everyone else took credit, you know exactly what this feels like. If that's you, hit subscribe. I share stories like this every week. Now back to where things were about to fall apart. The breaking point didn't come from the money. I want to be clear about that. The $23,400 was evidence of what my parents were willing to do. But the breaking point came from a phone call I didn't make. I was 25. It had been 8 years since the garbage bag on the sidewalk. I was working as a program coordinator at a housing advocacy nonprofit, a fitting place to land, given how I'd gotten my first roof. Joan had moved into paralegal work by then, which suited her exactly. We had lunch twice a year. She kept me updated on housing law changes the way a mentor does, quietly, and without drawing attention to the fact that she was still looking out for me. That February, I got a call from Aunt Gail. She told me my father had been hospitalized. Cardiac event, minor, the doctor said, but enough to require a procedure and a week's observation. She thought I should know. I thanked her, I hung up. And I sat in my car in the nonprofit's parking lot, in the February cold, with the heat running and the windows fogging up, and I waited to feel something that told me to call the hospital. I waited a long time. What I felt instead was this. I thought about the doorway. My father standing there while my mother handed me the garbage bag. His face, the specific quality of his silence. Be safe, Nora. And then the door closing. And then 8 years of nothing. I thought, he did not call when I graduated. He did not call at Christmas. He did not call when my grandmother died. He did not call when my mother signed my name on a legal document to steal from a dead woman's bequest. He was a man who had never made a decision in my direction. I did not call the hospital. I drove back to my apartment. I made dinner. I sat at the table and looked at the wall. Then I opened my laptop. I opened the evidence file. I read through everything I had. The probate record. The photographs of the relinquishment letter. The attorney's name. The notarization stamp. The date discrepancy. And then I did something I should have done 3 years earlier. I added a new section to the document, and I wrote, what I have not yet accounted for. I started listing. The farmhouse, who owned it now? My mother had inherited 1/3. Had she bought out Gail and Dennis? Had the property been sold? I didn't know. I had not looked. I spent 4 hours that night on the county assessor's website. Property records are public. That is a fact that changes things once you know it. The farmhouse had been sold. 14 months after my grandmother's death. The sale price, $312,000. 1/3 of $312,000 is $104,000. My mother had received $104,000 from the sale of that property. Gail received the same. Dennis the same. And in the same month as that sale, I cross-referenced the dates. My parents had paid off the remaining balance on their home mortgage, $67,400, paid in full. Cash transaction. I sat back. I looked at the ceiling. I had not known any of this. I had been living in my apartment, eating lunch at my desk, and my parents had been liquidating an inheritance that came partly from a woman who had loved me and paying off debts with it. I was not in those numbers anywhere. I opened the new subfolder in the evidence file. I named it property. Then I reached for my phone, not to call my parents, to call Joan. She answered on the second ring. I told her what I'd found. There was a pause, not of surprise, of assessment. She said, "How ready are you?" I said, "Tell me who to call," she said. "I'll send you a name tonight." The name she sent was Catherine Voss, an estate litigation attorney who handled, specifically, cases involving contested inheritance, probate fraud, and forged documentation. I called Catherine Voss the next morning. Catherine Voss had an office that smelled like old carpet and black coffee and something underneath that was faintly like wood smoke. She was in her early 60s, with gray hair cut close to her head, and the particular stillness of a person who has heard a great many hard things and is not easily moved by them. She read through what I brought her in 47 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the wall. She made no sound while she read. She turned pages deliberately. When she finished, she set the folder down and looked at me. She said, "Tell me about the notarization." I told her, 17 days after the funeral. My parents' town, a notary I had never heard of. A date I had spent in my own city, an hour's drive away, never contacted about any estate matter. She said, "Do you have anything that places you in your city on that date?" I said, "I have a work calendar showing a full day staff training. I have a time-stamped badge scan from the building. And I have a receipt from the coffee shop on the ground floor at 8:14 that morning." She looked at me for a moment. She said, "You kept a receipt from 8 years ago." I said, "I kept everything. I work in housing advocacy. I was raised by Joan. We keep everything." The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. She picked the folder back up. What Catherine confirmed over the following weeks was this. The forged relinquishment letter was prosecutable. In our state, submitting a fraudulent document to a probate court, a notarized document bearing a forged signature, constitutes probate fraud. It is a felony. The statute of limitations had not yet expired. Because the estate remained technically open pending a minor clerical matter Hartwell's office had not yet resolved. What she also confirmed was this. My grandmother's will had included me as a named beneficiary. A named beneficiary's claim survives the original estate distribution if fraud can be demonstrated. The $23,400 bequest, plus applicable interest over the intervening years, plus the personal property items never delivered, could be recovered in a civil action. What my mother did not know was that I had 14 months of assembled documentation. Catherine called it thorough. That was the word she used. Thorough. She said, "You've done most of the groundwork." I said, "I work in housing. We document everything." She said, "Good, here's what I need from you now." She gave me a list. More records. The county property transfer documents. The mortgage payoff record, which was public. A signed declaration describing the phone call with Hartwell when I had been informed of the relinquishment letter. Anything from Gail, if she was willing. I called Aunt Gail that weekend. I had not told her about the relinquishment letter when I found it. I hadn't wanted to put her in the middle of something I wasn't ready to pursue. But now I was ready. I drove 40 minutes to Gail's house on a Saturday afternoon. She sat across from me at her kitchen table, and I put the estate record in front of her, and I pointed to the letter, and I told her what I had found. She looked at it for a long time. The kitchen was quiet. There was a clock on the wall above the stove. It ticked. She looked up. She said, "Vivian told me you had signed off voluntarily. That you didn't want anything to do with the family." I said nothing. She said, I believed her. She looked at the letter again. Then at me, then back at the letter. She said, "That is not your signature." She said it simply, like a fact. Because she had known my handwriting since I was a child. Birthday cards, thank you notes, the letters I had sent her from school. She said, "What do you need from me?" I told her, a signed statement. Her recollection of what Vivian had told her, whatever she was willing to provide. She said, "I'll have it to you by Thursday." She stood up to pour more coffee. Her back was to me when she said, quietly, "I should have called you when your mother told me you signed off. I should have called you. I said, you didn't know, she said. I should have. That was all. What my mother did not know, by the time Catherine filed the formal complaint with the probate court, was that I had a notarized statement from the county records office confirming the date of the relinquishment letter submission, a work badge scan and a coffee receipt placing me 61 miles away on that date, a statement from Gail disputing the narrative that I had voluntarily relinquished, a forensic document examiner's report. Catherine arranged it, confirming that the signature on the letter was inconsistent with my authenticated signature samples on 4 other dated documents, a folder titled Evidence, 14 months of quiet, careful work, and an attorney who, when she called my mother's lawyer to inform him of the pending complaint, did not raise her voice once. What my mother also did not know was that Gail had called her 2 days before the meeting and told her only this, that she needed to come to a meeting at an estate attorney's office to discuss grandmother's estate, a procedural matter. Something clerical. My mother agreed to come. She had no idea I would be there. Alright, I need to pause here for just a second because this next part, I've never told anyone the full version. If you're still here, thank you. That means something. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And drop a comment. What would you have done? Okay, here's what happened. The attorney's office was on the 2nd floor of a brick building on the main street of the county seat, the kind of building that has been a professional office since 1940 and smells like it. Old wood, old carpet, the ghost of decades of coffee. The windows looked out onto the street below, where it was a gray November Tuesday and people were walking with their heads down against the wind. I arrived 11 minutes early. I wore the gray blazer I'd bought the year before for a grand presentation. I had a folder in my lap. I had not slept well, but I had eaten breakfast, which I considered a victory. Catherine was already there, speaking quietly with her associate. She looked at me when I came in and gave a single nod. That was all the reassurance I needed. My Aunt Gail arrived 7 minutes later. She sat beside me. She had dressed carefully, a dark coat, lipstick. She did not say anything. She put her hand briefly on my arm. Then she folded her hands and looked at the table. Vivian arrived at exactly the appointment time. She came in the way she always entered rooms, posture correct, pace measured, a small deliberate smile for the receptionist. She was wearing a cream-colored blouse and a blazer the color of dry sage. The floral perfume reached me before she did. She took 3 steps into the conference room and stopped. She saw me. She went very still. Then her face did something I had not expected. It didn't collapse, and it didn't harden. It went carefully blank, the face of someone choosing an expression rather than having one. She sat down across the table. She did not look at Gail. She looked at the attorney. She said, I wasn't told this was a family meeting. Catherine said, this is a legal matter. Thank you for coming, Mrs. My mother said, why is my daughter here? Not a question. A statement delivered like one. I looked at her across the table. I had prepared for this moment. I had thought about what I would feel when I saw her. The last time I had seen her face in person, I was 17 years old and she was handing me a garbage bag. I had imagined this moment many times in the 10 years between. What I felt, looking at her across that conference table, was clear. The same thing I had felt every time I closed the evidence folder and knew what was in it, not anger. Not grief. Clear, I said. I'm here because grandmother left me $23,400 and I never received it. She said, you signed a relinquishment. I said, I didn't sign anything. The room went quiet. Catherine opened the folder. She turned it so the document examiner's report faced my mother across the table. She said, a forensic analysis of the signature on the relinquishment letter submitted to the estate of your mother confirms with 94% certainty that the signature is not consistent with authenticated samples of your daughter's signature. My mother looked at the report. She looked at it for a long time. She said, that analysis could be wrong. Catherine said, it could. Which is why we also have a time-stamped badge access record and a dated receipt placing your daughter 61 miles from this county on the day the letter was notarized. Someone in the room put something down on the table. I think it was her own pen, set down too hard. My mother. She set her pen down. She said, and her voice had changed quality, thinner, more careful. Nora, if you had wanted to be part of this family's, I said. This isn't about the family. She stopped. I said, this is about a legal document submitted to a probate court bearing a forged signature. That is a felony in this state. I kept my hands flat on the table. I said, Catherine has filed a formal complaint with the probate court. The estate has been reopened. The $23,400 bequest plus accrued interest will be returned to me as part of the estate resolution. There will also be a civil matter regarding the personal property items that were never delivered. I paused. I said, your attorney will explain the rest. Vivian looked at me. For the first time since she'd walked in, she really looked at me, not through me, not past me. At me. I don't know what she was looking for. I don't know what she found. Gail beside me had not moved. She was looking at the table, her jaw was set. Then my mother looked at Gail, she said, you brought her here. Gail said, she had a right to be here. Vivian said, you went behind my, Gail said, Vivian. Just the name, quiet, final. My mother stopped talking. The attorney across from us said something about next steps and the documents that will be sent to her counsel. My mother's face had closed entirely now, the blank chosen expression held perfectly in place, the posture still correct. She was a woman who had never in her life let anything cross her face that she had not decided to let cross. She stood when the meeting ended. She did not look at me again. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame. She said, without turning, I hope you feel that this was worth it. I said, yes. One word. I did not elaborate. She left. The door closed. The room was very quiet. Outside the window, the November wind moved a paper cup down the empty street below. Gail exhaled slowly beside me. She reached over and put her hand on mine, briefly. Then she sat back. Catherine said, you did well. I nodded. I stood up. I gathered my folder. I put on my coat. I went down the stairs, and out the front door of the brick building, and I stood on the sidewalk in the November cold, and I looked at the street. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, not from grief. From the effort of having been completely still for that long, and then being allowed to move again. I stood there until they stopped. Then I walked to my car. I drove to a diner 2 blocks over. I sat in a booth by the window. I ordered coffee and eggs and toast and I ate all of it. It was 11:14 in the morning. I had not eaten since 6 a.m. I sat in that booth for 40 minutes and watched the November street and felt, I keep coming back to this word clear. I texted Joan. Done. She texted back. I know. I've been waiting. The probate court reopened the estate 4 weeks after the filing. The document examiner's report, combined with the alibi documentation and Gail's statement, was sufficient to establish that the relinquishment letter had been fraudulently submitted. My grandmother's $23,400 bequest was returned to me with 4 years of accrued interest, $26,814 total, disbursed 11 weeks after the court order. The personal property items, the things my grandmother had labeled for me by name, which my mother had taken into her house after the funeral, were catalogued and returned to me through a court-supervised process. Some of them were there. Some were not. I received what remained and did not ask about the rest. The criminal matter, the probate fraud complaint, was handled separately. I was not the one who decided how far it went. I had filed the complaint. What happened after that was the state's decision, not mine. I will say that my mother's attorney negotiated for a resolution that did not involve a public trial. I will say that the record exists. My father called me once, 6 weeks after the meeting. He said, Nora, I want you to know, I didn't know about the letter. His voice was the same as it had always been, quiet, careful. The voice of a man who had made his way through 63 years of life by not being in the way of things. I said, I know, Dad. There was a long silence. He said, I should have called you. When you left. I said, yes, you should have. Another silence. He said, I'm sorry, I said. I know, and then, I'll call you again sometime. I don't know yet if I will. But I meant it the way I said it, not as a promise, as a possibility. That felt like enough. For now. My Aunt Gail drove 40 minutes to have lunch with me the week after the estate was resolved. She arrived with a card and a small wrapped box. Inside the box was a photograph, a picture from when I was about 6 years old, sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table, with my grandmother on one side and Gail on the other, all 3 of us laughing at something out of frame. My grandmother's handwriting was on the back. Nora, Gail, Grandma, that's Saturday. Gail said. She kept that picture on her dresser. I took it after the funeral. I thought you'd want it. I looked at it for a long time. I said, thank you. That was all. We ate lunch. We talked about other things. It was enough. Jo and I had dinner in the spring, at a restaurant near her office. She ordered the most expensive thing on the menu and raised her glass and said nothing in particular, and I raised mine back. She said, "You're a different person than you were at 17. I said, "I'm the same person." She thought about it. "More of one," she said. "More of one, yes. I moved that spring. A new apartment. 3rd floor, window facing east. In the mornings, the light came in across the kitchen table at an angle that made everything look deliberate. I sat there with my coffee, and I looked at the photograph of the 3 of us at my grandmother's table, and I thought about what it means to be claimed by people. My grandmother had claimed me. Her will said so. Her account, left in my name, said so. The labeled items said so. That claim survived 10 years and a forged signature and a closed door. That is the thing about being claimed by the right people. It holds. I've thought a lot about what I would say if someone asked me what I learned. The honest answer is not the dramatic one. The honest answer is this: I learned that documentation is a form of dignity. Every time I wrote something down in that file, every date, every dollar amount, every attorney's name, every discrepancy, I was saying to myself, this happened, this is real. You are not making this up. When you are 17, and the people who were supposed to claim you put you on the sidewalk, the hardest thing in the world is believing that your account of events is worth keeping. The world does a great deal to convince you that what happened to you is somehow your fault, or an overreaction, or something you should absorb quietly and move past. Writing it down is how you refuse that. One entry at a time. What I know about Vivian is that she loved me once. I believe that. The French braids on Sunday mornings were real. The bedtime reading was real. And she was also capable of forging my name on a legal document and taking money a dead woman left me. Both things are true. I have stopped trying to make them into one story. Joan gave me the first roof. She gave me the tools. She gave me, over 10 years, the absolute certainty that what you document, you can defend. My life now is quieter than the 10 years before it. I still work in housing advocacy. I still help people figure out that they have more rights than they knew. I think about the girl who received Becca's phone number 6 months before she needed it and kept it. I think about what it means to keep things you don't yet know you'll need. Here is what I want to say to anyone listening who was put out by the people who were supposed to keep them in. You were not the problem they were trying to solve. You were the inconvenience they chose not to manage. Those are different things. And wherever you are, keep the receipts. All of them. That's Nora's story, or maybe in some way it's yours too. If you've ever been the one holding everything together while everyone else let go, I see you. Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if this meant something to you, subscribe. There are more stories in the description. Women who decided enough was enough and did something about it. I'll see you in the next one.